Say that I'd tell you guys a story about Elvis Presley and Jerry Reed.
I didn't say it to be cute. I said it because I was blown away.
When Jerry Reed stood up and said that the disrespectful remarks being made about Elvis Presley were a disgrace to everything the man actually was, he wasn't being dramatic. He wasn't exaggerating for effect. He was drawing a line in the sand that should have been drawn decades ago, a line between the people who actually knew Elvis and the vultures who have made careers out of desecrating his memory. Let's be absolutely clear about what we're dealing with here. This isn't about someone making an offhand comment that Jerry found slightly distasteful. This isn't about a joke that didn't land or a criticism Jerry couldn't handle. This is about people who never stood in the same room as Elvis Presley rewriting who he was to fit whatever narrative makes them money, gets them attention, or feeds the machine that turns legends into cautionary tales. And Jerry Reed, the man who actually worked with Elvis, who made music with him, who saw him at his best and understood him at his worst, Jerry finally had enough. The remarks that set this off weren't just disrespectful, they were revisionist. They took a man who revolutionized music, who broke down racial barriers, who gave everything he had to his craft and his fans, and they reduced him to a punchline. They painted him as a drug-addled has-been who stumbled through his final years with no dignity, no talent, and no awareness of his own decline. That's the narrative that's been building for years. Elvis the tragic figure, Elvis the cautionary tale, Elvis the man who had it all and threw it away, Elvis the bloated, paranoid, desperate shell of his former self who died pathetically on a bathroom floor. And every time someone repeats that version of events, they're not just being cruel, they're erasing the real man. They're writing over the Elvis that Jerry Reed knew, the Elvis who was still a consummate professional, who still cared deeply about his music, who still showed up and gave performances that made grown men weep. Jerry watched this happening in real time. He watched as people who claimed to care about Elvis's legacy spent more time sensationalizing his struggles than honoring his contributions. He watched as documentaries and tell-all books focused more on prescription pills and bizarre behavior than on the fact that Elvis Presley changed the entire landscape of American culture. And for years, Jerry stayed quiet, because that's what people of his generation did. You didn't air dirty laundry, you didn't profit off tragedy, you didn't turn your friendship with someone into a media circus just because you could. But silence has a limit. Respect has a breaking point. And when the disrespectful remarks crossed from criticism into character assassination, when they moved from acknowledging Elvis's struggles to mocking them, when they turned a complicated human being into a two-dimensional joke, Jerry realized something. Staying silent wasn't respectful anymore, it was complicity. Because here's what those disrespectful remarks were really saying: that Elvis Presley at the end of his life had nothing left to offer, that the final chapter of his story was nothing but embarrassment and decline, that the man who gave the world Suspicious Minds and If I Can Dream and performances that defined what charisma even meant, that man became irrelevant, pathetic, not worth remembering except as a warning. That's what Jerry was pushing back against. Not criticism, not honest conversation about addiction or the pressures of fame or the failures of the people around Elvis to protect him. Jerry was pushing back against the reduction of a human being to his worst moments, the erasure of everything else he was in service of a more dramatic story. And Jerry had the credibility to make that pushback matter, because Jerry wasn't some distant admirer or posthumous expert. He worked with Elvis. He was there in the studio when Guitar Man was being recorded, watching Elvis light up with genuine excitement over the music they were creating together. He was there on movie sets, seeing how Elvis treated everyone from the director to the grip with the same respect and kindness. He saw the Elvis that the cameras didn't catch, the one who was still passionate, still talented, still trying. That's the man these disrespectful remarks were dismissing. That's the legacy they were trampling, and Jerry Reed wasn't having it. What makes this even more significant is the timing. These remarks aren't coming from Elvis's contemporaries, from people who were actually there and might have legitimate grievances or complicated truths to share. These remarks are coming from a new generation of commentators, biographers, and cultural critics who discovered Elvis Presley through documentaries and tabloid stories, who think they understand him because they've read the same recycled narratives everyone else has. They don't know Elvis, they know the myth, they know the tragedy, they know the version of events that's been polished and repackaged for maximum dramatic impact. But Jerry knew the man, and the man deserved better than being turned into entertainment for people who never earned the right to speak on him. That's what this is really about. It's about who gets to tell the story. It's about whether the people who actually lived through something, who were present for the real moments, who formed genuine relationships, whether those people matter more than the ones who show up later with microphones and theories and agendas. Jerry Reed made his position clear. The disrespectful remarks weren't just wrong, they were an insult to everyone who actually knew Elvis Presley. They were an insult to the music. They were an insult to the legacy. And most importantly, they were an insult to a man who can't defend himself anymore. And Jerry Reed wasn't about to let that stand. Because when you knew Elvis, when you really knew him, when you worked alongside him, when you saw who he was when the spotlight wasn't on and the crowds had gone home, you understood something the tabloid version will never capture. You understood that Elvis Presley was more than his struggles. He was more than his mistakes. He was more than the tragic ending that everyone wants to obsess over. He was a man, a complicated, talented, generous, flawed, extraordinary man, and he deserves to be remembered as such. Not as a punchline, not as a cautionary tale, not as tabloid fodder for people who wouldn't have been let through Graceland's gates when he was alive. Jerry Reed saw what was happening, he heard the disrespect, and he called it exactly what it was, a disgrace. Here's what the so-called Elvis experts don't tell you when they're making their definitive documentaries and writing their revealing biographies. They weren't there. They didn't stand in the studio with him. They didn't watch him work. They didn't see the moments that actually defined who Elvis Presley was. Jerry Reed did. And the friendship between Jerry Reed and Elvis Presley, the real depth of it, the mutual respect that existed there, that's a story that gets buried under all the tabloid drama and the posthumous analysis. Because it doesn't fit the narrative. It's not sensational enough. It doesn't support the tragic decline story that everyone wants to sell. But it's the truth, and it matters more than every tell-all book written by people who were never in the room. Jerry and Elvis first connected through music in a way that most people don't understand. This wasn't a celebrity friendship. This wasn't networking. This was two musicians recognizing something genuine in each other, a shared understanding of what music could be, what it should feel like, what it meant to actually create something instead of just performing it. When Elvis recorded Guitar Man and US Mail, both Jerry Reed songs, it wasn't just Elvis covering some tracks. It was Elvis recognizing the craft in Jerry's writing, the authenticity in his sound. Elvis could have recorded anything. He could have had his pick of songwriters desperate to get an Elvis Presley cut, but he chose Jerry's songs because they had something real in them, something that spoke to who Elvis actually was beneath all the Vegas glitter and Hollywood veneer. And Jerry saw it from the other side. He saw Elvis in the studio, completely focused, completely present, working through arrangements with the kind of intensity that only comes from someone who genuinely cares about the music. This wasn't phone-it-in Elvis. This wasn't going through the motions Elvis. This was a man who still loved what he did, who still wanted every note to matter. The people making disrespectful remarks about Elvis now, they talk about him like he stopped caring, like he gave up, like the final years were just a slow-motion surrender. Jerry knew that was garbage. He watched Elvis fight for every performance, every recording, every moment of connection with his art. Even when his body was failing him, even when the prescription medications were taking their toll, even when the pressure was crushing, Elvis still showed up for the music. Jerry saw that, he respected it, and he never forgot it. Then there were the movies. Gator brought them together on screen, and what Jerry witnessed there told him everything he needed to know about the difference between the real Elvis and the caricature everyone was creating. On set, Elvis wasn't the paranoid, disconnected figure that the tabloids described. He was professional. He was kind to the crew. He remembered people's names. He treated everyone, from the director to the person holding the boom mic, with genuine respect. That's not the behavior of a man who'd lost himself completely. That's not someone who'd given up on being human. That was Elvis Presley doing what he'd always done, showing up as himself, treating people right, finding joy in the work even when everything else was falling apart. And Jerry noticed something else. He noticed how lonely Elvis was, not in the dramatic, cry-for-help way that biographers love to write about, in the quiet way, in the way someone gets when they've been famous so long that genuine connection becomes almost impossible, when every conversation might be recorded, every confidence might be sold, every moment of vulnerability might end up in a tabloid. Elvis was surrounded by people constantly, but how many of them actually knew him? How many actually cared about him as a person rather than as a meal ticket or a claim to fame or a story they could tell later? Jerry understood that isolation because Jerry was a real artist himself. He knew what it meant to be respected for your work while still feeling fundamentally misunderstood. And in the moments when he and Elvis connected, really connected, talking about music or life, or just being two men who happened to exist in the insane circus of entertainment, Jerry saw who Elvis actually was. He was insecure despite the confidence everyone assumed he had. He was deeply aware of his own limitations even while the world told him he was perfect. He was nostalgic for a simpler time before the fame became a prison. He was generous to a fault, giving away money and gifts and opportunities because making people happy was one of the few things that still brought him genuine joy. That's the Elvis that Jerry Reed knew. That's the man these disrespectful remarks are erasing. And here's what should make everyone pause. When you look at the people who actually worked with Elvis, the musicians who played with him, the co-stars who acted alongside him, the crew members who saw him every day, they all describe the same person. They all talk about his professionalism, his kindness, his genuine love for his craft. But the people who write the books, who make the documentaries, who give the expert commentary on news programs, they describe someone completely different. They describe a train wreck, a cautionary tale, a man who spiraled out of control and took everyone down with him. Why the disconnect? Because the truth doesn't sell as well as tragedy, because complexity doesn't fit into a 2-hour documentary format, because acknowledging that Elvis was still talented, still professional, still fundamentally decent, even while struggling with addiction and health problems, that makes the story less dramatic. And we can't have that, can we? We can't have Elvis Presley be a complicated human being dealing with impossible circumstances. We need him to be either a god or a disaster. We need the rise to be mythical so the fall can be catastrophic. Jerry rejected that entire framework because Jerry didn't know Elvis the myth. He knew Elvis the musician, Elvis the colleague, Elvis the friend. And that Elvis, the real one, earned Jerry's loyalty, earned his respect, earned his defense when people who never stood in a studio with him started making pronouncements about who he was and what his life meant. Jerry Reed earned the right to speak on Elvis Presley. He earned it by being there, by working alongside him, by seeing the private moments that revealed character, by forming a genuine friendship that wasn't about using Elvis for advancement or profit. So when Jerry said the disrespectful remarks were wrong, he wasn't speaking as a fan. He wasn't speaking as someone protecting an idol. He was speaking as someone who actually knew the man everyone else just thinks they understand. And between Jerry's first-hand experience and everyone else's second-hand narratives, there's no contest. Jerry was there, they weren't. Jerry saw the real Elvis. They're selling a version they constructed from tabloids and tragedy. That's why Jerry's defense matters. That's why his voice cuts through all the noise. Because friendship, real friendship, earned through shared experience and mutual respect, that carries more truth than all the expert analysis in the world. What Jerry Reed was really calling out, what he understood better than most people want to admit, is that there's an entire industry built on tearing down legends. A whole ecosystem of people making money by finding new ways to diminish, pathologize, and sensationalize the dead. And nobody has been fed through that machine more thoroughly than Elvis Presley. This isn't speculation. This is observable fact. Count the number of books published about Elvis since his death. Count the documentaries. Count the untold story specials and the dark truth exposés and the psychological analyses from people who never met him. Now ask yourself, how many of those portray Elvis as a talented, complicated man doing his best under impossible circumstances, and how many portray him as a cautionary tale about fame, excess, and self-destruction? The ratio tells you everything you need to know, because tragedy sells, decline sells. Watching someone fall from grace, that's entertainment. But watching someone maintain dignity while struggling, that's just uncomfortable. That requires empathy. That doesn't fit neatly into a 3-act structure where the hero becomes the villain and we all get to feel superior for having avoided his mistakes. Jerry saw this happening in real time. He watched as people who were there for Elvis's worst moments, who enabled his prescription drug use, who isolated him from genuine help, who profited from keeping him dependent. He watched those same people write tell-all books positioned as concerned warnings. He watched them go on talk shows with sad faces, talking about how they tried to help, how they saw the signs, how tragic it all was. And Jerry knew exactly what that was. It was profiting from the corpse. It was turning your own complicity into a redemption narrative. It was rewriting your role in someone's decline so you could make money from their tragedy while positioning yourself as the wise observer who saw it all coming. That's the disrespect economy. You participate in the problem, then you sell the story of the problem. You enable the destruction, then you profit from analyzing the wreckage. And the person at the center of it all, the one who can't defend themselves anymore, who can't provide context or nuance or their own version of events, they become whatever you need them to be to make your story work. Elvis has been everything to everyone who needed to make a point. He's been the victim of his own success, the product of a predatory industry, the symbol of American excess, the tragic genius, the cultural appropriator, the misunderstood artist, the self-destructive addict, the exploited performer, the entitled superstar. Pick your narrative. There's a book for it. There's a documentary for it. There's an expert ready to explain it to you with absolute certainty, despite the fact that they never knew the man personally. And here's what Jerry understood that most people don't. Elvis was a product of his time and his circumstances in ways that nobody wants to genuinely grapple with. He was raised in poverty in Mississippi in the 1940s and 50s. He experienced trauma that would have destroyed most people. He was thrust into fame at 21 years old with no preparation, no support system, and no framework for understanding what was happening to him. He was drafted into the military at the height of his career. He was controlled by a manager who saw him as a product, not a person. He was prescribed medications by doctors who should have known better. He was isolated by fame to a degree that's almost impossible to comprehend. Does any of that excuse his choices? Number, does it provide context? Absolutely. Does it complicate the simple narrative of a man who just couldn't handle success? Completely. But context doesn't sell, nuance doesn't drive clicks, empathy doesn't make for compelling television. So instead of understanding Elvis Presley as a human being navigating an impossible situation, we get the simplified version. The version where he's responsible for everything that happened to him. The version where his struggles are character flaws rather than symptoms of a larger systemic failure. Jerry rejected that framing entirely, because Jerry knew that Elvis worked harder than almost anyone in the industry. He knew that Elvis cared deeply about his craft. He knew that Elvis gave more of himself than should have ever been asked. And he knew that the people now lecturing about Elvis's poor choices were often the same people who made money from those choices, who encouraged them, who benefited from keeping Elvis exactly where he was. The disrespectful remarks that set Jerry off were part of this larger pattern. They were the latest iteration of the same exploitation dressed up as analysis. They were people who never earned the right to speak on Elvis using his name and his struggles as content, as engagement, as a way to seem insightful while actually just recycling the same tired narratives that have been profitable for decades. And Jerry had watched this happen to other people too. He'd seen how the entertainment industry chews people up, spits them out, and then makes money analyzing what went wrong. He'd seen how the same system that creates impossible pressure then blames individuals for breaking under that pressure. He'd seen how we, as a culture, love to build people up just so we can watch them fall. Elvis was the ultimate example of that cycle, and every disrespectful remark, every reductive analysis, every posthumous diagnosis from armchair psychologists, it all feeds the machine that killed him in the first place. Because that machine runs on dehumanization, it requires turning complicated people into simple stories. It demands that we reduce human beings to their most dramatic moments so we can consume those moments as entertainment. Jerry understood something that the disrespect economy doesn't want you to know. You don't get to use someone's vulnerabilities as your retirement plan. You don't get to enable someone's worst moments and then profit from describing those moments as cautionary tales. You don't get to treat a human being as content just because they can't object anymore. That's not honoring someone's memory. That's not preserving their legacy. That's grave robbing dressed up as historical analysis. And when the latest round of disrespectful remarks hit, when someone who never knew Elvis, who never worked with him, who never earned any right to speak authoritatively on his life, decided to reduce him to a punchline or a case study or a symbol of everything wrong with fame, Jerry saw it for exactly what it was. It was the disrespect economy doing what it always does, taking someone who can't fight back and turning them into whatever generates the most attention, the most revenue, the most self-satisfied cultural commentary. Jerry Reed saw it happening in real time, and he refused to be part of the machine that grinds up the dead for entertainment. He refused to let Elvis Presley be reduced to just another commodity in an industry built on exploitation. Because some things are more important than clicks. Some things are more important than book deals. Some things are more important than being the person with the hot take that goes viral. Loyalty is more important. Truth is more important. Basic human decency towards someone who gave everything to his art and his fans, that's more important. And Jerry made damn sure everyone knew where he stood. Jerry Reed speaking out against the disrespectful remarks about Elvis wasn't just about defending a friend. It was about drawing a line that matters far beyond one man or one legacy. It was about establishing a principle that we've lost somewhere along the way, that the people who actually knew someone, who lived through the real moments, who formed genuine relationships, those people matter more than the ones who show up later with microphones and agendas. And right now, in this moment, that principle is under attack like never before. Because we live in a world where proximity to truth doesn't matter anymore, where lived experience is treated as less valuable than compelling narrative, where the person who tells the most dramatic story gets more credibility than the person who actually has the facts. And nowhere is that more evident than in how we treat the legacies of people who can't defend themselves. Jerry's defense of Elvis is significant because it challenges the entire power structure that's been built around controlling posthumous narratives. Think about who gets to speak authoritatively on Elvis Presley now. Think about whose voices are amplified, whose books get published, whose documentaries get made, whose commentary gets featured. It's not the musicians who worked with him. It's not the people who were in the studio watching him create. It's not the friends who saw him in private moments when the cameras were off and the crowds had gone home. Those people exist. They have stories, they have truth, but their voices get drowned out by the people who have something to sell. And what they're selling is always the same thing: drama, tragedy, scandal, the dark side, the untold truth, the shocking revelation, because that's what generates attention in a world where everyone is competing for eyeballs and engagement. Jerry represented something that's becoming extinct: people who valued loyalty over exposure, people who kept confidences, people who understood that just because you could tell a story didn't mean you should, people who believed that some things were more important than being relevant or making money or getting your 15 minutes. That generation is disappearing, and with them goes the last line of defense against complete revisionism. Because once everyone who actually knew Elvis is gone, the field is wide open. The narrative can be whatever generates the most revenue. The truth becomes whatever the loudest voice claims it is. That's what's at stake here. That's why Jerry's defense matters beyond just Elvis Presley. And here's what should terrify everyone who cares about truth. Most of the people currently controlling Elvis's image, speaking authoritatively on his legacy, making money from his name, they have financial stakes in maintaining certain narratives. They have business interests tied to specific versions of who Elvis was. They have brands built on particular interpretations of his life and death. Jerry Reed didn't have any of that. Jerry's defense of Elvis wasn't protecting an investment. It wasn't maintaining a revenue stream. It wasn't about positioning himself as an authority so he could monetize that authority later. Jerry's defense was about basic integrity. It was about refusing to let someone he respected be turned into a commodity for people who never earned the right to profit from him. That's authentic. That's real. That's the kind of voice that cuts through all the manufactured controversy and strategic narrative management. Because Jerry had nothing to gain from speaking out except the satisfaction of knowing he told the truth. And the truth Jerry was telling goes beyond defending Elvis from disrespectful remarks. The deeper truth is this: we've created a system where the dead can't rest, where every legacy becomes a battleground, where nothing is sacred and everything is content, where the moment someone dies, the race begins to see who can tell the most compelling story about them, truth be damned. Elvis is the clearest example of this, because he's been dead for nearly 50 years and the exploitation hasn't slowed down, it's accelerated. Every few years, there's a new angle, a new revelation, a new way to repackage his tragedy for a new generation. And each iteration strays further from the actual man and closer to whatever mythology serves the current cultural moment. The people making disrespectful remarks about Elvis now aren't even pretending to care about accuracy anymore. They're not interested in understanding him as a product of his time and circumstances. They're interested in using him as a symbol, a talking point, a way to seem insightful while actually just reflecting current prejudices and assumptions back at an audience that wants to feel smart for recognizing patterns that aren't actually there. Jerry saw through that completely, because Jerry knew that Elvis Presley was infinitely more complex than any posthumous analysis will ever capture. He knew that reducing Elvis to a set of diagnoses or a series of poor choices or a cautionary tale about the dangers of fame, that wasn't insight. That was lazy thinking dressed up as expertise. Real understanding requires empathy. It requires context. It requires acknowledging that human beings are messy and contradictory and can be simultaneously talented and troubled, generous and selfish, strong and vulnerable. It requires accepting that we'll never fully understand someone else's internal experience, especially when that experience involves pressures most of us can't even imagine. But that kind of nuanced, empathetic understanding doesn't generate headlines. It doesn't go viral. It doesn't sell books or drive documentary views or create controversy that boosts engagement metrics. So instead, we get the simplified version, the version where Elvis is whatever we need him to be to make our point, and the people who actually knew him, who could complicate that narrative with inconvenient truths, get pushed aside. Jerry's defense was a refusal to be pushed aside. It was a declaration that loyalty still matters, that truth still matters, that you can't just say whatever you want about someone who can't respond and expect no pushback from the people who actually knew them. And what makes this even more powerful is the message it sends to everyone currently fighting similar battles. To Riley Keough trying to honor her mother's wishes against people who want to maintain control. To every family member of every famous person who's watched opportunists profit from their loved ones' struggles. To every genuine friend who's had to watch their private relationship become public property. Jerry's saying, you have the right to push back. You have the right to call out disrespect. You have the right to say that proximity matters, that lived experience matters, that being there matters more than having a platform. Because if we don't establish that principle, if we let the disrespect economy continue unchecked, then every legacy becomes whatever the highest bidder wants it to be. Every complicated human being gets reduced to whatever narrative serves current interests, and the truth becomes completely irrelevant. Elvis Presley deserves better than that. He deserves better than being a perpetual content farm for people who see his struggles as material. He deserves better than having every aspect of his life dissected by people who think reading about someone is the same as knowing them. And Jerry Reed made sure everyone understood that, not with careful PR strategy, not with calculated messaging, just with honest defense of a man who earned his loyalty and his respect. That's what real friendship looks like. That's what integrity looks like. That's what refusing to participate in exploitation looks like. And in a world where those things are increasingly rare, Jerry's defense isn't just about Elvis. It's a reminder that some of us still believe loyalty matters more than relevance, that protecting someone's dignity matters more than getting clicks, that the truth is worth defending even when no one's paying you to do it. If you believe the people who actually knew legends should matter more than the ones profiting from their ghosts, drop a comment right now. If you think loyalty beats opportunism, share this before the algorithm buries it. Subscribe, because this conversation about who controls legacy is exploding, and what comes next will expose exactly who's been lying about Elvis for profit, while his real friends stayed silent out of respect.